Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak on British arms and military cargo export controls, specifically our exports to Israel amid one of the most devastating conflicts in modern memory. It's horrific. It's a slaughterhouse. That's what it is, a slaughterhouse. These are the words of Tom Pottekar, a British doctor working in Khan Yunis, as he urged world leaders to stop talking and do something. Since October the 7th, Israel has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians. As a father, the thought of the loss of a single child is heartbreaking. The estimate of more than 50,000 children killed or injured in the Gaza Strip is inconceivable. Yet despite this scale of destruction, our government has continued to export weapons to Israel without pause, without transparency, and without apparent regard for international humanitarian law. Despite the UK government suspending around 30 of 350 export licences in September 2024, a new report exposing UK arms exports to Israel uses data from the Israel Tax Authority to reveal the sheer volume we continue to send.
Will my honourable friend please give way?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. There was a report in the Guardian newspaper last month which suggested that despite the suspension of key arms export licences to Israel back in September, UK firms have exported thousands of military items, including munitions to Israel, including...
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. We're into just.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The exports have included items such as bombs, grenades, torpedoes, mines, missiles and similar munitions of war. Does my honourable friend agree that it is completely conceivable that these weapons have been used to kill and maim children in Gaza, and therefore the only humane and reasonable option is for us to suspend all of the arms export licences to Israel and to ensure that no British manufactured munitions are going to Netanyahu's Israel?
Can I thank my honourable friend for his intervention? A very easy intervention for me to respond to. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. Since October 2023, there have been at least 14 shipments of military goods from the UK to Israel. These include over 8,500 munitions, bombs, grenades, missiles, and 146 armoured vehicle parts. In October 2023 alone, the UK exported 150,000 bullets.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he makes some excellent points. But since October 2023, Action on Armed Violence analysis identified over 500 RAF-linked flights from Akrotiri to Israel airspace. While described as reconnaissance, the MAD refuses to confirm whether any carried military cargo. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the Minister must confirm without delay what was the exact purpose of these flights? Have any of them transported military equipment to support to Israel? And has the UK conducted surveillance over Gaza, and has any intelligence been used with the IDF? If RAF assets were operating during incidents, is there not clear evidence of serious IHL violations and a duty to share all relevant intelligence with the ICC without delay?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. This is something I'm going to be touching on later on in my speech, and I also hope that we will be getting some answers on those exact points in due course. Between October and December 2024, this Labour government approved £127.6 million in single-issue arms licences to Israel, more than the total approved from 2020 to 2023 combined. My honourable friend for Coventry South was accused of sensationalism for highlighting this to the Foreign Secretary, but these are the government's own figures. Included in that total is £60 million in incorporation licences, up from just £2 million in the previous quarter. And this begs the question, why have single and incorporation licences surged both since we took office and after the so-called suspension? And remember, open licences aren't included in these figures, meaning the true scale of UK military exports to Israel remains unknown and unaccountable. The report also exposes that despite pledging to halt F-35 part shipments directly to Israel, evidence suggests the UK continues supplying crucial components. These jets, 15% British-made, fuel relentless attacks on Gaza, registering over 15,000 flight hours since October 2023, dropping bombs which kill hundreds of people indiscriminately.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. One horrific example of why we must stop supplying the parts for the F-35 fighter jets is the al-Mawasi attack last July. F-35s dropped £2,000 bombs on a designated safe zone in Gaza, killing 90 civilians and injuring 300. The use of such powerful munitions in densely populated areas is clearly a violation of international humanitarian law. Key parts of the F-35s, as my honourable friend says, carrying out that attack may well have come from Britain. They clearly have done in other attacks. So if we want to avoid any complicity in such Israeli war crimes, don't we need to stop these exports immediately?
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I'm very glad that the al-Wamasi attack was mentioned, and I wholeheartedly agree again with the sentiments expressed by the honourable member. Freedom of information data reveals the F-35 open general export licence being used 14 times to export to Israel in 2023, 3 times as much as any other year. Israel is heavily reliant on F-35s for its attack on Gaza and is expanding its fleet. Without UK components, these jets could not fly. The latest report from the Palestinian Youth Movement further details the F-35 supply chain and shows that sub-assemblies and parts for F-35s, including those used for repairs and maintenance, are all logged and documented, and that the global supply chain for the US-run F-35 maintenance programme has robust traceability. Therefore, the government's claim that it is impossible to halt supplies of F-35 components to Israel without undermining the global F-35 supply chain does not stand up to scrutiny. And this raises serious questions around the UK's legal duty to prevent genocide. Yet the weapons continue to flow. I will.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Does the honourable member share my concern that some equipment, like drone engines, may be being exported to Israel without the need for export licences, potentially getting into the hands of military organisations, perhaps not to directly drop bombs, but to engage in other military activity like providing reconnaissance and decoys? And would he support a requirement for all items that can be used within a military conflict zone to be exported, requiring a full licence so the public knows exactly where UK businesses are engaging?
I think the honourable member raises some really important points there, and I am in agreement with that intervention. When reviewing arms export licence to Israel, the UK must also consider violations across the occupied Palestinian territories, including the West Bank, where Palestinians face home demolitions, forcible displacement and settler violence, actions breaching the 4th Geneva Convention and risking UK legal obligations under the arms export criteria. Will the honourable member give way? The Foreign Secretary's recent condemnation of Israel's actions as monstrous was welcome, but incomplete. For my very same government continues to facilitate such actions. We cannot have it both ways. We cannot condemn atrocity whilst simultaneously fueling the machinery that enables it. We cannot claim to uphold international law while profiting from its breach. I urge the Minister to respond fully, and not with platitudes, but with clarity, honesty, and above all, accountability. I will.
Can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for Montgomeryshire and Kildare for bringing this forward? I spoke to him beforehand. I've showed him my intervention and I have his permission to do that. The Honourable Member will understand the need that there is to bring an end to this war and bring hope to the children of the region. However, I would ask if the Honourable Member will also acknowledge that Israel is still under attack daily and cannot be left with no means to defend herself from those who hide amongst civilian targets. We must ensure that actions taken here do not simply reset the gauge of casualties. Thank you.
I do agree with the Honourable Member that all countries have the right to defend themselves. I have condemned the vile events of October the 7th in other places, and I do so again here. All countries have the right to defend themselves, but not any country has the right to commit war crimes. Despite the International Court of Justice's ruling that there is a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza, the UK continues to authorise arms exports to Israel, making us in potential breach of our obligations under the Genocide Convention, the Geneva Conventions and the Arms Trade Treaty. In the hearing of Al-Haq versus Secretary of State for Business and Trade, it was revealed that the government decided there was no serious risk of genocide back in July 2024. Yet in Parliament we are told the government is waiting on a court determination. And in court we are told it is not for the courts to decide, as these treaties are not incorporated into domestic law, but are Parliament's responsibility. I ask the Minister, if not Parliament or the courts, who is the government accountable into the decision to continue to transfer arms to Israel, potentially breaching international law and facilitating a genocide? Will the government publish its most recent assessment of the risk that Israel is committing genocide? I will.
I thank the Honourable Member for his very powerful speech, and I echo his call on the government to publish its most recent assessment of the risk of genocide. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that it makes a mockery of our obligation under international law to prevent genocide if our government says that the only way it can judge it is after genocide has been conclusively proved in court to have happened? Does not our obligation to act to prevent genocide mean that we should stop all arms exports to the Israeli government now, in the face of the clear evidence of war crimes and indeed genocide occurring in Gaza?
I'm in a special agreement in the importance on preventing these things, and I will be very eager to, as I'm sure the Honourable Member will be, to hear from the Minister in relation to those comments. Let us turn to the government's own assessments. In the same hearing, it was revealed that by September 24, Israel had launched tens of thousands of airstrikes and killed over 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza. The public are being told to trust our judgment on the weapons this country is sending to a state conducting a genocide. This is the same government that, after reviewing 413 incidents, determined only 0.5% of these potentially violated international humanitarian law. Not a single incident involving only the deaths of Palestinians was deemed even possibly unlawful. While the Foreign Secretary repeatedly talks about the UK's robust licensing regime, the reality is that British export data is notoriously opaque. I ask the Minister, can the government confirm whether it has reached a new assessment since September? And if so, disclose this to the public. If the government is truly confident in the legality of its exports, will it publish custom codes, product descriptions and a full paper trail from sender to end user? And I would ask, would this level of opacity be tolerated if it were British civilians under the rubble? We are repeatedly told that the UK arms exports are defensive in nature, reduced to nothing more than helmets or goggles. But let's be clear, the government has never defined what defensive means, especially when exports include components for F-35 fighter jets capable of dropping 2,000-pound bombs on densely populated areas. Since September 2024, there's been no evidence that UK exports were limited to non-lethal equipment or that they were not intended for use in Gaza. The government doesn't claim that it's too difficult to track where these weapons end up. Instead, it invokes vague concerns about international peace and security, as though suspending exports to Israel would somehow endanger global stability, including support for Ukraine. But this is a false dichotomy. Palestinian lives are not less valuable. The F-35 programme is one of the most sophisticated supply chains on earth. If we wanted to, we could track every part. The real question is, do we want to? I ask the Minister, how does the government define a weapon as defensive? What precisely makes an F-35 component defensive? It's the government's position that the need to continue to supply F-35 components outweighs the risks of genocide? And if so, is there any circumstance that would lead to the UK stopping that supply? The government has claimed that there are red lines that would trigger a halt to exports, but Gaza is already a slaughterhouse. Children are emaciated or dying of hunger. Hospitals have been intentionally destroyed. Israel's leaders vow to wipe out Gaza, and still the weapons flow. So finally, I ask the Minister, where is our red line? Madam Deputy Speaker, I call on this government to suspend all arms exports to Israel to ensure that no British-made weapons are used in Israel's brutal plans to annex, starve and ethnically cleanse the Palestinian population. The credibility of this House depends not just on what we condemn, but on what we enable. And history will remember, we enabled too much.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Minister Douglas Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm responding on behalf of the Government on this issue tonight, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for Montgomeryshire and Glyndŵr, for securing this important and timely debate. Let me address the House this evening by first setting out the Government's policy and then setting out the Government's approach to transparency that formed a key part of my honourable friend's contribution. It is accepted on all sides of this House that, as the Government has made clear, what was witnessed on the 7th of October 2023 was not an act of liberation but an act of barbarism by Hamas. And over the many months of this conflict, the UK Government has made the case for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all the hostages detained, the protection of civilians, access for aid and aid workers to Gaza, and the need for a path to long-term peace and security in the region. So the responsibility of Hamas is clear, but so too is the appalling humanitarian crisis which has since unfolded in Gaza as a result of Israel's subsequent actions. The way in which Israel is conducting its operations is indefensible, disproportionate, and, in the view of the UK Government, counterproductive to any lasting peace settlement. The Government's policy remains that the only way to secure peace and stability is through an immediate ceasefire, the release of the hostages held captive by Hamas, the protection of civilians, and the lifting of all Israeli restrictions on aid being sent into Gaza. Last month, at the United Nations Security Council, the UK Government made the case for urgent humanitarian aid to enter Gaza and expressed our outrage at both the killing of Palestinian Red Crescent workers and the strikes on the UN Office for Project Services compound in March. We also issued a statement with 27 international partners on the mechanisms needed to deliver those vital aid supplies. And together with the leaders of France and Canada, we made clear our strong opposition to the latest expansion of Israel's military operations. Let me make a little progress and then I'll be open to interventions. Let me turn next to the actions taken by this Government in support of these statements. We have supported the restoring of funding for UNRWA. We have suspended arms licences. We have provided £129 million in humanitarian assistance to the occupied Palestinian territories in the last financial year, and the Government has decided to suspend negotiations on the upgraded free trade agreement with this Israeli Government. I give way.
Appreciate the Minister giving way. Last week, the week before last, the Foreign Minister said that we were suspending arms negotiation with the Israeli government. Yet just last week, we had a trade envoy, Lord Austin, visiting Israel, saying how wonderful it was to be there. Can the Minister please explain how those two matters do not contradict each other?
So there are long-standing relationships of trade and economics with Israel, including, for example, as I understand, 1 in 8 of the prescribed drugs available through the National Health Service being provided by an Israeli company. So we have taken a clear position of not upgrading the free trade agreement, but recognising, for example, that those supplies are important. In terms of the trade envoy roles, that's a role that is accountable to the Secretary of State in the Department of Business and Trade, and we were clear that he would not directly deal with the Israeli government when he was there and has no responsibility for the free trade agreement negotiations that would otherwise have been taking place in the coming months. Let me turn now to the specific issue. Let me make a little more progress and then I'll be happy to take further interventions. Let me turn next to the specific issue of export licences. On coming into office, the Foreign Secretary commissioned an immediate assessment into Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law. It was on the basis of this assessment that on the 2nd of September last year, we suspended arms export licences for items to the IDF that could be used in military operations in Gaza. As a result of this decision, licences were suspended for a range of military equipment, stopping the export of F-16 fighter aircraft components, of targeting systems, and of licensable parts that make unarmed aerial vehicles. This measure is still in place, and I would like to reiterate that based on our current assessment of potential breaches of international humanitarian law, we are not licensing military equipment provided directly to the IDF that could be used for military operations in Gaza. It is right to acknowledge that our export licences granted in relation to Israel cover a wider remit than simply those items that may be used in Gaza. There are a relatively small number of licences for the IDF relating to equipment which we assess would not be used in the current conflict, including, for example, parts for air defence systems that defend Israel from acts such as the major aerial attack from Iran in April of 2024. We also think it is right for us to continue providing military-grade body armour used by non-governmental organisations and journalists, and to provide parts of the supply chain which are ultimately re-exported back out of Israel to support the defence of our NATO allies. This government is fully committed to upholding our responsibilities under domestic and international law, and has acted in a manner consistent with our legal obligations, including under the Arms Trade Treaty and the Genocide Convention. On the global F-35 programme, we are, of course, facing a critical moment of European security, with war on the continent at our neighbours' doorsteps. Undermining the F-35 programme at this juncture would, in the view of the government, disrupt international peace and security, NATO deterrence, and European defence as a whole. In relation, let me fulfil the explanation and then I'll be happy to take interventions. In relation to components for the F-35 aircraft, our exporters provide these to a global spares pool and the common production line for new aircraft where they have no sight and no control over the specific ultimate end users for their export. Put plainly, it is not possible to suspend licensing of F-35 components for use by one F-35 nation without ceasing supply to the entire global F-35 programme. It was therefore judged necessary by the government to exclude F-35 components from the scope of the suspension. But let me be very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK government is not selling F-35 components directly to the Israeli authorities, and the licence that allows the export of F-35 components was amended in September to specifically make clear that direct shipments to Israel for use in Israel are not permitted. I make way.
The honourable member mentioned about the red lines that the government has. The Secretary of State for Business and Trade said that there were red lines that would make the government stop sending F-35 parts. But the Minister has just been very clear that it's not possible to stop sending F-35 parts. If the Secretary of State for Business and Trade says that there's red lines, and how are we not at those red lines at this point, given what is happening in Gaza, What exactly is going on here?
Deputy Speaker, we are not directly sending parts to Israel for the F-35s. We are continuing to support the global component pool of the F-35 programmes for the reason that I set out in my remarks, which is we judge as a government that there is a material risk to the security of our NATO allies and more broadly to European security if the F-35, an aircraft that is used by a number of our allies, was no longer able to secure the supplies and therefore the aircraft were no longer able to fly. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Minister giving way. I just want to understand who is making the rules over the spare parts pool. Surely, if we are trading into that pool, we have got a right to set the rules. And if those components are going on to F-35s being bought by Israel, we have a right to block those parts or to kick Israel out, as we did in 2019 with Turkey.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we make approximately 15% of the components that contribute to the F-35 programme, but the F-35 programme is an international programme of which we are but one partner. We continue to supply this programme because our judgment as a government is not doing so would undermine the continuing functioning of the F-35 programme, which, as I say, in the government's view, is of critical importance both to European and global security. I have given way a number of times on this point. I'm keen to make a little progress. The government has made these judgments calmly and soberly and will continue to do so with full awareness of our responsibility. Madam Deputy Speaker, I turn now to the question of transparency. As the UK Government, we publish quarterly official statistics and an annual report about export licences granted and refused. We provide a searchable database allowing users to produce bespoke reports drawing on this data, and we are committed to openness on strategic export licensing, which provide the means for Parliament and the public to hold us to account. However, I'm keen to make a little more progress and then I'll take further interventions. These are exceptional circumstances, and so as a government, we have heard requests from honourable members on both sides of the House to release further details, including information on licence applications in progress and as full information as we can disclose on the types of equipment that are covered by each extant licence. Recognising the exceptional nature of this issue and the importance of providing transparent and robust information to ensure Parliament and the public can hold the Government to account, in December we laid in the Library of the House an exceptional release of export licensing data focused specifically on Israel, plainly setting out how many licences remained extant at that time, how many had been granted since June 2024, and how many had been refused. To summarise that release, I wish to assure members of this House that remaining licences relate to either non-military items, military items for civilian use, or items not for use in military operations in Gaza. These licences also extend to components in items for re-export to other countries, that is, those then that leave Israel. Ongoing licensing applications are also decided on this basis. In fact, of the 352 licences extant to Israel, as of the 6th of December, 191 related to non-military licences. These included components of commercial aircraft components, equipment for private manufacturing firms, and parts for submersible vessels for use in scientific research. That left 161 licences relating to military equipment. However, of these, less than half related to the Government of Israel or the IDF. Instead, most related either to UK components that private Israeli companies would incorporate before re-exporting an item to a third country, or related to military-grade equipment for civilians, such as body armour for journalists and NGOs, as I have already mentioned. I can advise the House that recent reporting on this topic does not provide distinctions between items for civilian and military use, or items remaining in Israel, or for re-export. The UK is not allowing the direct export of arms for use in Israel's military operations in Gaza. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and he's giving a detailed response. To take the Minister back to the point of the international pool of F-35 spares, is it the government's contention that a conditional licence is impossible? That is, that we can provide F-35 spares on the basis of conditional licence that they are not then sent to Israel to be used in Gaza.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm acutely conscious of the time. The exclusion from the suspension decision for F-35 components should not in principle apply to licences for F-35 components which could be identified as going to Israel for use by Israel. Exports of F-35 components directly to Israel are therefore suspended unless these are for re-export. But let me return to the specific point which I know has been a subject of much scrutiny in relation to recent reporting outside of this House. The majority of military licences approved last year are from components of military items for re-export to third countries, including to the UK's NATO allies. Of around 142 million's worth of military goods licensed for Israel in 2024, the vast majority of that overall value was supporting the production of items for use outside of Israel. This includes more than £120 million, or around 85% of the total licence value, for components to support exports of military items from Israeli companies to a single programme for a NATO ally. Madam Deputy Speaker, these remaining licences have no utility in military operations in Gaza. The suspension of such licences was not required by our export licence criteria and would have done nothing except harm UK companies and UK businesses engaged in authorised and legal trade. Since September, we have refused all licence applications for military goods that might be used by Israel in the current conflict, in line with the suspension decision. More applications were refused in 2024 than in the preceding 4 years combined.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.